Hi, guys. I just recorded my first guest interview with Dr. Alan Gomes, the author of 40 Questions About Heaven and Hell. Dr. Gomes is a professor emeritus of theology at Talbot School of Theology at Biola University in Southern California, where he taught for 37 years. That's where I first got to know Dr. Gomes while I was working at Biola. And ever since then, I've long admired and respected and personally been enriched by his work. I just loved every minute of this interview, and I think you'll really enjoy it too. And that you'll not only grow in your knowledge, but also be spiritually encouraged and edified by it. Dr. Gomes' book, 40 Questions About Heaven and Hell, has received accolades from scholars. It's been described as a masterpiece, and it truly is a masterful theological work. Dr. Gomes is a first-rate theologian. We are going to address some of the questions he addresses in his book, including possibly some of the questions you've had about heaven and hell. And we'll also address the new Apostolic Reformation teachings, the unbiblical teachings that are promoted by apostles like Bill Johnson at Bethel Church in Redding, California. And I am going to ask Dr. Gomes what he thinks about some of Bill Johnson's teachings and NAR teachings that relate to the topic of heaven. So without further ado, here's the interview. Oh, and I should mention that because it's a lengthy interview, I am actually going to be breaking it into multiple parts. So after you finish this episode today, just be sure to come back for the future episodes so that you don't miss any of it. Okay, without further ado, here he is. Hi, Dr. Gomes. Thank you so much for joining me today. I've been very excited. This is my very first interview on my podcast, and so I'm just so honored to have you on. And this is so fun for me after all these years of knowing you and appreciating your work so much all these years. So thank you so much for agreeing to come on my podcast.
Oh, thank you, Holly. I'm delighted to be here.
Great. And I wanted to mention before I start out and asking you some questions that I really appreciated in your opening chapter about why is it important to think about the afterlife? Because as you point out in that chapter, a lot of people think that thinking about the afterlife is actually a waste of time because it doesn't help us pay the bills. It doesn't help us find a spouse. And so, what's the point? And I really appreciated how you just talked in that chapter about how thinking about the afterlife is actually extremely practical. And you said, I am firmly convinced that thinking about death and what comes after it is the single most practical activity we can do. And then you go on to explain how our beliefs about the afterlife and what happens after we die actually have an impact on everything that we do and actually give us hope as well. And so I really appreciated that.
Thank you. Yeah.
Yeah.
I still believe that.
Yeah.
I find it more true all the time.
Okay, so with that in mind, I'll just start asking my questions here. My first question is, what is one of the most common misconceptions Christians have about heaven?
Well, to me, that one's pretty easy in terms of identifying what the most common misconception is about heaven. And I think the biggest misconception that Christians have is the idea that heaven is the Christian's eternal home. And the truth is, heaven is not the eternal home of the Christian. Now, if I could, because I know we got a lot of ground to cover today, I'd like to dwell on that one a little bit because in unpacking that, it actually sets the groundwork for, I think, a lot of other things that we're going to cover here.
Yeah, absolutely.
So if that's okay.
Take all the time you need.
Okay, so if I go a little bit long on that one, don't think I'm going to necessarily do that with every question you ask, but this one is kind of foundational, okay? So here's the thing. It's very common. I mean, you hear this all the time among believers that heaven is the eternal home of the Christian. But as I just said, despite how ingrained this notion is, the Bible does not teach that Christians will spend all eternity in heaven. Heaven is not the eternal home of believers, even though it is true that believers who have already died and who die in this present age do go to heaven and reside there temporarily. The Christian's final hope, the Christian's eternal hope, as it's taught in Scripture, is to dwell in a physical body on a new, renovated physical earth for all eternity. That's where we're going to be for all eternity. And so Christians simply do not occupy heaven for all eternity, whether with a body or without a body. That's not our eternal home. Now, if I could, I'd like to mention that you find this idea, and it's no wonder Christians think this, but it's so firmly entrenched in popular preaching and also in Christian music and hymns, and it's also commonly found in scholarly sources, surprisingly. So, for instance, if you look at the Erdman's Dictionary of the Bible, you look up the word heaven. It says heaven is, quote, the ultimate home of Christ and his disciples. The Baker Encyclopedia of the Bible, good, credible source for a lot of information about Scripture. It says all believers will ultimately, notice that word, ultimately, dwell in heaven in their resurrection bodies. So now it has us in heaven with our resurrection bodies. And it says, which they will receive when the Lord comes for them from heaven. And then finally, a very good scholarly source, the Dictionary of Paul and his letters, among the definitions of heaven that it gives, the fourth entry reads that it is the eternal home of the believer. Now, the conventional wisdom, I think, that a lot of people have, and in the popular conception of it, is that we're going to spend all eternity in heaven, either in some kind of non-physical or maybe quasi-physical state, maybe sitting on fluffy clouds and strumming harps. But this is really far from the true and much richer biblical picture of the eternal state for believers. And again, without maybe flogging this horse too much, I do want to illustrate this conclusion because it's so close to home with things that we're so familiar with. So, for example, you can illustrate it by looking at some of our most cherished Christian songs and hymns. Take for example, these are a couple popular songs, right? You've heard the song, "This World Is Not My Home," right? Mm-hmm. I'm just a passing through. Well, if we're going to believe the words of this song, we're going to live eternally in heaven, which is described also as glory land. And where is it positioned? Well, it's somewhere beyond the blue, right? That's where we're going to live. And then, of course, not to be outdone, you've got the song "Do Lord," right, which Johnny Cash popularized. I guess I'm wearing my black here.
I like Johnny Cash.
yeah, well, I do too. But anyway, he popularized the song. And so not to be outdone, "Do Lord" puts our glory home way beyond the blue, right? And then, of course, we have the words to maybe a much soberly expressed hymn. The hymn, let's see, it's "Jesus, Thy Blood and Righteousness." The lyrics are written by Nicholas von Zinzendorf. And he says there, when from the dust of death I rise to claim my mansion in the skies. Now, so this, from the dust of death I rise, that's bodily resurrection, but that's where we're going to claim our mansion. Where? In the skies, you see. So the hymn is not talking about the disembodied state while our bodies are in the grave awaiting resurrection. This is talking about we're going to be resurrected and then live in the skies. Um, and then I guess to just be a total Grinch about it and rag on different hymns. We have Away in a Manger, right? Which is, I mean, it's a good Christmas carol in a lot of ways, but it talks about, it has us imploring God to fit us for heaven to live with thee there. It doesn't say forever, but the implication is that's kind of like where we're gonna wind up. Now, so you say, well, all right, you're picking on hymns and some dictionary articles and maybe some preaching. Does it really matter? Well, I think it does. I think it has practical implications. This mixed up thinking on the eternal state has tragic results, I believe. And that is, one of the results, I think, is that Christians remain overly attached to the present world, despite what they may say about looking forward to, the so-called joys of heaven. They think that they're supposed to regard heaven as their true eternal home. But on the one hand, there's something they can't get too excited about because it seems a little bit unnatural. Certainly the traditional picture of heaven as an ethereal, floaty, intangible, kind of interminable church service, right, that just never ends, is a little bit weird and unappealing. Now, don't get me wrong, when Christians die now and they go to be with the Lord in what we call the intermediate state between death and resurrection, their bodies are in the ground, they're with the Lord. They're in a state of blessedness. They're happy. They're joyous. They have no more pain or anything like that, but they don't have physical bodies. And that's not the intention. It's not God's intention to leave us in that state. It's not the full picture. We were designed to be embodied beings, which is, of course, why God resurrects the body, in the first place. And that's where we experience fullness of joy in body and spirit, right? So when you contrast the conventional wisdom then with the true biblical picture of life on a magnificent, beautiful, lush earth, and again, think something free of all pollution, earthquakes, harsh climate extremes, decay. I mean, any of the things that cause us disappointment and pain in this present life. Well, I mean, who wouldn't want that? Like, sign me up. I'm ready to go now for that. And when you think about it, and I guess this would get into a question we might want to unpack later as to, well, what will we do in the eternal state?
I was going to ask you that.
Okay. Well, we can get into that a little more, but basically what that means is we can pursue physical activities that are similar in many ways to what we do now, only vastly better. They're purged of all defect, disappointment, which include physical undertakings, because again, now we have new physical resurrection bodies on a new physical earth. We can do physical things, work with our hands as well as with our minds. And of course, we have unbroken, perfect fellowship with God and with fellow believers on this new earth, relationships of consummate joy and love for one another in some perfect idyllic setting. I mean, I don't know. I like the Lord of the Rings movies. It makes you think that, well, the new earth, it must be like New Zealand or something. Right?
Oh, my daughter has really been getting into those lately. So yeah.
This is even better than New Zealand, right? It's even better than what you see there. So simply stated, to just simply kind of wrap up that idea, I'm convinced that one of the main reasons that Christians don't find the idea of living forever in, quote, heaven, especially desirable or compelling is because, as it's typically presented at least, it differs so much from our present experience in ways that violate our nature as true, complete human beings, body and spirit, right? And while there will be much different about the eternal state compared to the way things are now. Uh, in certain key and fundamental ways, there's more continuity with our life in the eternal state between that and our current mode of existence than we often realize. Now, again, I'm not ragging on dying and being with heaven. Paul says it's much better to depart from the body and to be with the Lord than it is to be here. Mm-hmm. But it's not the best. Don't confuse better with best. And the best is to enjoy God fully in experiencing him in the fullness of who we are and what we were designed to be.
So yeah, I've actually, even recently, I've been talking to people who are saying, I haven't been excited about heaven in the past because I don't like to sing, and the idea of just singing forever sounds horrible, or just being on a cloud, or all of these things. And I even when I was younger, like a kid, I think I would think about that, like, oh, that doesn't sound very fun, but I'm supposed to be excited about it.
Exactly.
And you feel guilty because you're a Christian and you're supposed to be excited about heaven, but that doesn't sound fun. So do you think that there will be jobs in heaven? Do you think there'll be sports in heaven?
Oh, well, that's okay. Those are some interesting questions. Now, here's the thing. We don't... The Bible gives us a fair amount of detail about the afterlife on some issues more than others. We can easily over-speculate and try to be too smart by half, But I think there are some things that we can say about what we'll be doing in the afterlife, at least in general terms. And by afterlife, I mean on the new heavens and the new earth, the eternal state. So in my book, I mentioned 5 categories, and maybe we can flesh out a couple of them. So the 5 points that I make, and this isn't exhaustive, but what I say in the book is, in the answer to the question, what will we do in the eternal state? We're going to, number 1, revel in God's direct presence and worship him supremely. Now, of course, we revel in God's presence now and worship him here, but it's going to be, on a whole new level of immediacy and intimacy in the eternal state. We're going to experience joyful rest. And by rest, it doesn't mean we're going to be drugged or just kind of, sleeping all day, but it means we will experience, in other words, our labor. And I do think we're going to be involved in doing things with responsibilities and things of that sort, but it won't be characterized by pain. So if we like gardening or whatever, there won't be weeds to pull, that kind of thing. The third point is, and this is a key one, and we might want to focus on this, is that we're going to engage in physical activities with physical bodies, and that's why we'll be on a physical earth, because it makes sense to be, to have a physical body and to operate on a physical sphere like a physical earth. That'd be the third point. The fourth is that we're going to enjoy social interactions with one another. So it's not like we're just like monks in a cell all separated. We're going to, it'll be a big party in a good sense. It's going to be a hoot. And then finally, and then maybe this fifth point maybe actually gets directly to your question, is that we will exercise responsibility and service. We will exercise responsibility and service. So, I could just jump to that one if you want, because I think that is what you're asking about. How is it you put the question?
Yeah, well, I just wondered about jobs and the other. I don't know if this is related or not, but will we continue to learn? Because I've had times I've thought, even recently, that I really hope there's reading in heaven, because I love to read books and I love to learn, and the idea of just being able to do that for eternity sounds amazing. So kind of related, maybe.
Yeah. Well, to just tackle that last question first, I believe yes, we will continue to learn. And that's because we're creatures. We're created beings, so we're not infinite. Like God doesn't learn. But for God to learn would be a defect, right? So when we say God is omniscient, we don't, I'll get a little theological here. We don't mean that he just knows a bunch of stuff or even an infinite bunch of stuff, but that God knows everything all at once by just one intuitive act, if you want to speak of it that way. God has sort of you might call like kaboom kind of knowledge. He just like knows everything. It's before his contemplation eternally, right? But that's not true of creatures, whether it's you or I as human beings. It's not true of angels. So we grow in knowledge. We learn things. And that was true of Jesus also as a man. He grew in wisdom and stature and favor with God and man. Now, that's not just because of the fall. That's because we're creatures. And so the way I say it is this, that growth, and here we're speaking, growth in knowledge, I think, that growth is the glory of a mutable creature. It's the glory of a mutable creature. We're mutable, and growth is a glorious thing, not something to be gotten rid of. So, if that's the case, we will learn new things. We will explore God's creation on this lush, beautiful new earth. I believe, going back to the point about engaging in physical activities with our physical bodies, we don't know for sure the details on a lot of things, but it seems plausible. How about that? That we will create works of art that require using our hands with physical objects. It's possible we'll play sports on the new earth. I say possible. Now, I don't know what the physics are like on the new earth, so I don't play golf now, so I don't particularly find it fun, but there would be people who do. Will there be golf on the new earth? Some people are very concerned. Well, maybe, but I don't know what the physics of the new earth is like. I know there won't be golf in heaven, because in heaven, the temporary state of believers now when they die, they don't have physical bodies, so they don't have physical limbs where they could hold a physical club and whack a physical ball. On the new earth, we certainly could do that because we'll have physical limbs, and I suppose we could, but maybe we won't find golf fun up there. Maybe we'll find some version of it. I'm sure if there is something like it, it'll be vastly more fun and better, but maybe similar to it in some ways. My son's a musician, professional musician, lives in the Memphis area. There's certainly, I think, from Scripture we can see that there'll be songs, and I take it literal music in praising God, right? So there'll be much work for composers to do, for musicians to do. Will they play their music on physical instruments that make sound in the same way that we hear them now? Possibly. Again, we don't know the physics of the new earth, but these things all seem, entirely likely to me. And yes, as far as your question about jobs, quite a few passages in the Bible actually suggest that God is going to invest us with various responsibilities in the kingdom. So the Bible speaks of this in terms of serving, for example, in Revelation 7:15, of exercising authority. We see this in the parables, Luke 19, ruling or being put in charge of cities, Matthew 25, reigning, and that's just to name some of the expressions used. Now, what do these responsibilities consist? Well, we don't really know maybe specifically how God's servants are going to exercise this authority, but quoting N.T. Wright, I think he's safe when he says, the redeemed people of God in the new world will be agents of his love, going out in new ways to accomplish new creative tasks to celebrate and extend the glory of his love. And so I think that when we look at the parables, of the talents of the minas, and they talk about ruling over cities. I mean, do these cities represent literal cities, or is it a figurative way of just talking about some other kind of responsibility of service, but the nature of which Jesus leaves unspecified? I guess I can't say for sure, but I see no reason that it could include physical cities. We know that there will be, well, I'm convinced from what I see in Scripture, that there will be physical cities on the new earth, the New Jerusalem being preeminent among them, but I think there's other cities as well. If there is, there probably will be some kind of societal structure that looks something like government, nothing like our current government, praise God, but but of course, without the functions of government that are involved in suppressing wickedness and sin, that won't be there. But so we're not going to need a police force or an army or something like that. But there could be positive ways in which there'll be structures set up so that we can serve one another in love, and God might have a kind of hierarchy in setting that up with differing degrees of authority. Now, of course, that raises the question, well, wait a minute, how can there be a hierarchy in the eternal state? Is there an inequality? Well, that gets to the question of rewards, and that's probably beyond, we have a lot of topics I know you want to talk about. But the fact is, there are degrees of reward. Everybody's going to be supremely happy, but we will have different capacities for service and different degrees of reward in the eternal state. And there'll be no jealousy about that or any hard feelings about it. We'll rejoice in other people's rewards as much as we rejoice in our own. So, I mean, those are some of the things I think about. And you say, oh, well, do I have to do service? I mean, I want to retire, Well, these are things that we'll love to do, right? And so it's not a burden. It's not burdensome. It's rest in the sense I mentioned earlier, that it's free from all of the imperfections and tedium and frustrations that characterize our current current employments in this present age. Okay, so I don't know. Does that help?
Oh yeah, no, that's
question?
I love that you went into that. And so one thing you talk about in your book is the importance of using proper terminology, like referring to making the distinction between heaven and the eternal state. And when we're talking about where we're going to be for eternity, that you recommend that we refer to that as the eternal state. And I've actually started doing that. I catch myself all the time. I've started referring to it as the eternal state. And then when I talk to other people, I have to kind of explain, well, I'm talking about what you're thinking of as heaven, but the eternal state, but I'm making that qualifier. But why is it important, would you say, to use the proper terminology?
Yeah, well, that's a good question. I already spoke in some detail in your first question about the confusion that's rampant. And even in those scholarly sources I quoted, if you look at them, they kind of mush together, and the hymns and the other things I gave as evidence, they kind of mush together heaven, the resurrected state, the new earth. Some scholars talk about heaven and earth being merged into some kind of third thing that's, kind of a earth/heaven or an earth-heaven that's an earth heaven, or this can be really confusing. And the reason that terminology is important, this isn't being pedantic or picky, is that we need correct and clear and distinct terminology to speak of clear and distinct realities, right? So if we have a certain word and it can refer to a bunch of things all at once, or none of them, or some combination of them, we don't always know what we're talking about. So having the right words to talk about the things that we are talking about, so that we know what we're discussing at any given point, is very, very important. Now, the word heaven, and I could spend some time on that if you want, is a biblical word. I mean, there's two words. There's a word in the Hebrew which is shamayim, and then in the Greek there's the word uranos, and those words have a range of meaning. So the terminology of heaven, as it comes into the English language as heaven, that's an explicitly biblical term. We find that in the Bible as a translation of those underlying Greek and Hebrew words. The expression eternal state, and the way I used it throughout the book, strictly speaking, that's not a biblical word. There's no passage in the Bible that uses the expression eternal state, but that's okay because we often have to use words that describe biblical realities, right? The word Trinity is not in the Bible, but it expresses a biblical reality. And we could multiply examples of that ad nauseum. But I use the word eternal state as a distinct expression to describe our final condition, kind of like after the dust settles and all is literally the dust settles and there's a new earth created. When all is said and done, it's the state, meaning our condition, and it's eternal, meaning it doesn't end. So I don't know, eternal state seemed to me to be a good way to frame it. If you have, a better way of saying it, I'm not hung up on that term. Make me an offer if it can be improved. But I don't know, that just seemed like a good way to do it. And to use that, especially juxtaposing it side by side with heaven, it makes it clear at any point, especially in reading the book, what reality I'm talking about. So okay, this is talking about, the disembodied state for believers, the abode of God, where angels live. Okay, that's heaven. And then we've got the new heavens, the new earth, the embodied state, the resurrected state. And there you are. So that's why I think it's important. It helps avoid confusion and it clarifies what we're talking about.
I really appreciate that because, the point that terminology is important because it clarifies and keeps everyone on the same page, what you're talking about. It may be hard to work the term, eternal state into a worship song or something.
It may not sing well.
But it's important. It's important that we have proper terminology and theological concepts. So if you're ready to move on to the next question, I really appreciate that I think that was important to set all that up, especially as we move into our other questions. What is one of the most common misconceptions that Christians have about hell, would you say?